Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio. Welcome to Policy and Rights, the show about government policy and human rights. Welcome back to Policy and Rights here on Depictions Media Radio. I'm your host, Michael Clogs. We'll have two segments today, both dealing with reports. The one report is about foreign interference within the Canadian government, and the big question there would be, are there members of Parliament who are involved in foreign activities that could actually hurt the Canadian government and its democracy? The other report is about children being harmed in armed conflicts or war. And there are some disturbing things, and there are some statements that are going to be made about the current situation between Palestine and Israel with Gaza and children that may seem a bit disturbing, but we do have a report on how that is going. But let's go to the BBC, as they are reporting, as we know, the G7 in Italy has been going on, and there have been some agreements made, and one of the big ones that was made is G7 leaders agree to a $50 billion, and we're going to assume that this is in U.S. funds, a $50 billion loan to Ukraine to aid in the war against Russia. So the G7 nations have agreed to a $50 billion deal to fund Ukraine. Leaders have announced in southern Italy, today is a historic day. Ukrainian President Zelensky, alongside his U.S. counterpart Joe Biden, after they signed a 10-year bilateral security agreement. Okay, and also from the BBC, as they're reporting on Donald Trump, and the president candidate has met with Republican representatives in Congress, returning to the Capitol for the first time since January 6th riot at the end of his presidency. Then we are talking about Wells Fargo, and an American bank has fired numerous employees for allegedly fake keyboard activity to fool bosses into thinking they were actually working. And I think that one's a kind of interesting one, that technology has gotten that far that we can actually fake when we're working or when we're not working. Elon Musk, Tesla, and Tesla's shareholders have backed and recorded record-breaking pay package for the company's CEO, one of the richest people, and also approved a plan to move the firm's headquarters to Texas. So, reporting from the BBC. And from CNN reports, they're reporting on severe weather in heavy rainfall that has caused unrelenting flooding in southern Florida will continue for the fourth consecutive day before a reprieve is in sight for millions in the state of Florida, since heavy rains started swamping the region as of Tuesday. The flooding has become waist deep in some places. Hazardous conditions on streets, roadways have stranded drivers and made roads impassable, and they have forced some schools in hard-hit counties to shutter, and hundreds of flights to be canceled or delayed. Flood watches remain in effect for over 7 million people across southern Florida, including Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and on the other hand, high temperatures will expand parts of the plains to the East Coast. And today is the hottest day of the year in Washington, D.C., reaching the mid-90s in Fahrenheit, and about 10 degrees higher than normal on, of course, the Fahrenheit scale. I don't have the conversion available for those of you who live in places where Celsius is the standard. On the abortion front, the Supreme Court on Thursday unanimously rejected a lawsuit challenging the FDA's approach to regulating abortion pills in midwife let's read that again. The Supreme Court on Thursday unanimously rejected a lawsuit challenging the FDA's approach to regulating abortion pills, allowing the drug to stay on the market. The ruling is a significant setback for the anti-abortion movement in what was the first Supreme Court case on the reproductive rights since the court's conservative majority overturned Roe versus Wade. The challenge to the drug had been vehemently opposed by the pharmaceutical industry, which warned that the ruling that the second guessed the regulations of it could be open to a legal challenge targeting sorts of medications. So, and on the CNN is reporting on the hostages taken by the Hamas. The fate of 120 hostages remain in Gaza is crucial to any deal to end a months-long conflict between Israel and Hamas, but senior Hamas officials told CNN no one has an idea of how many of them are alive, and that the deal to release them must include guarantees of permanent ceasefire and complete withdrawal of the Israeli forces from Gaza. So there we have it on that from CNN. So it looks like there's still trouble in Gaza as the release of the hostages is still under negotiation to and as long as Hamas is holding the hostages, of course, Israel is still saying that they will continue to fight. So, we're going to move forward into two other reports. So, one report on children in war. In 2023, children living in conflict situations experience violence in unbearable levels, according to the new report by the United Nations Secretary General. On children and armed conflict, published on June 13th, 2024. Children have been recruited, including at the front lines, attacked in their homes, abducted on the way to schools, the schools targeted by military, and used their doctors targeted for dreadful list goes on. The involving nature of complexity and intensification of armed conflict, as well as the use of explosive weapons in populated areas, has led to shocking increases in grave violations against children in 2023. The UN Secretary General annual report on children in armed conflict, which included for the first time information on Haiti among the 25 situations and one region monitoring arrangement on children in armed conflict agenda, revealed 32,990 grave violations were verified against 22,557 children. That doesn't say a whole lot for our humanity when children are under attack in such ways. Okay, and we move on to Jagmeet Singh, leader of the NDP party in Canada. He's speaking about on Parliament Hill after reading a unredacted foreign interference report from the National Security, Intelligence, and Committee of Parliamentarians. He is actually going to be quoted saying that those members of Parliament who participate in such foreign activities, they would interfere or put the agendas before Canada, their responsibilities to Canada and their responsibilities to the Canadian people. He does actually call them traitors. It is his opinion. It is not what is actually in the report. And I will add this, when you actually hear when he says it, he is kind of goaded and prodded into it. He does have a lot of trouble with his statements on this report because he is troubled by the level of foreign interference there is, and the unwillingness of Mr. Poilievre and Mr. Trudeau to do anything about it. He said that he is actually going to allude to the idea that if any of those members of Parliament had been in the NDP, that he would have swept them away. They would no longer be part of the party. There's a lot to be said when parliamentarians are involved in activities that could actually harm the Canadian democracy. They're the leaders of our country, and they're the leaders that we elected to put in place. They got to where they are because of the Canadian democracy, and now they, for whatever reasons of greed or it's tough to say what this could be, but why would these people who are supposed to represent us go against our well-being? So we will listen to the UN report on children, and then hear from Jagmeet Singh, and make our own conclusions about what is happening with the morality of governments, soldiers in armed conflict, and the people that we elect or look up to be in certain positions. So why don't we move forward, and we will listen to the UN report on children.
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning. Good morning, and welcome. Thanks for coming. As you know, the Secretary General's report on children in armed conflict is out as a document today, and we're very fortunate to have with us the Special Representative for Children in Armed Conflict, Virginia Gamba, who will be here to talk to you about that report and to take your questions. Ms. Gamba, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Nice to see you again in this room. So I've also asked my staff to have copies of my first initial statement. If you want to take a copy, you are more than welcome. In 2023, violence against children in armed conflict reached extreme levels, with a shocking 21% increase in grave violations vis-à-vis prior years. Utilizing the monitoring and reporting mechanism and its approved guidelines, UN personnel verified 32,990 grave violations against children in 25 CAC situations and one regional arrangement covering the Lake Chad Basin region. Of the 32,990 violations, 30,705 were committed in 2023, and the rest were committed earlier, but only verified in 2023. Violations affected a total of 22,557 children, of which 6,252 were girls. This provides another trend, as contrasted against other years, because the number of children who were victims of multiple grave violations increased, illustrated by the high percentage of girls being abducted for recruitment and sexual violence, including rape and sexual slavery. The highest numbers of grave violations during 2023 were, first and foremost, the killing and maiming of 11,649 children. Second, the recruitment and use of 8,655 children. And thirdly, the abduction of 4,356 children. Further, although a non-listable violation, the UN reported 5,205 verified incidents of the denial of humanitarian access to children, which is an unacceptably high figure, representing a 32% increase over previous years. Rape and sexual violence against children and attacks on schools and hospitals also increased or remained at exceptionally high levels, with 1,650 verified attacks on schools and hospitals and related personnel, and 1,470 verified conflict-related sexual violations against children, most of them girls. Sexual violence has historically been underreported, and yet this figure already is 25% increased over previous reporting cycles. I will discuss now the patterns and the trends we found in the figures of last year. Situations in the CAC report where substantial increase in grave violations were verified include a rise of over 155% violations over prior years in the conflict in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory, notably in Israel, the Gaza Strip, and the occupied West Bank. While in Sudan, we witnessed a staggering 480% increase in grave violations against children in highly populated spaces such as in Khartoum and in the Darfur region. Furthermore, Myanmar's situation deteriorated with a 123% rise in grave violations across the country, but with spikes in the Rakhine region. Unfortunately, grave violations also increased in the following situations: in Colombia, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Haiti, Lebanon, Nigeria, and Somalia. Another pattern that was perceived during 2023 was that roughly 50% of violations were committed by armed groups, including those designated as terrorists by the United Nations, whereas the rest were committed by state actors as they engaged in armed conflict with their opponents, and by unidentified perpetrators caused by landmines and IEDs. Armed groups were principally responsible for abduction, recruitment and use, and sexual violence against children, while the most prevalent violations attributed to state actors' armed forces were killing and maiming, including using explosive ordnance in highly populated areas, attacks on schools and hospitals and related personnel, and denial of humanitarian access to children. Explosive remnants of war, UXOs, mines, and IEDs were responsible for the killing and maiming of children and for impeding humanitarian access to children. I want to also stress another disturbing trend: the continued use of schools and hospitals for military purposes by parties to conflict in many of the situations under the Children and Armed Conflict mandate. The military use of these facilities, critical to children's education and well-being, not only denies children the use of these critical services, but also often creates conditions for opposing parties to consider these facilities as military targets. I urge all parties to conflict to stop the military use of schools and to ensure that hospitals retain their protected status. The last item I wish to highlight is the plight of children detained or deprived of liberty for their association or alleged association to parties to conflict. Detention should be used only as a measure of last resort and for the shortest appropriate period of time. Children should never be detained or prosecuted solely for their or their families' actual or alleged association with armed groups. I urge member states to treat children actually or allegedly associated with armed forces or groups, including those designated as terrorists by the United Nations, primarily as victims, to prioritize their best interest and to give child protection actors access to them. Ultimately, as I have said before, a child is a child is a child, even when they are perpetrators of violence. For this reason, any killing, maiming, or detention of children, regardless of the circumstances, will be recorded as such in the CAC reports. Now I will discuss the listing decisions of the Secretary General for this year. The decision of this year of the Secretary General for new listings of state actors and non-state armed groups reflects these patterns that I've just explained. As follows. The ferocious armed struggle by the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces, who had been allies in the past, has led to the listing of both these parties. The Sudanese armed forces have been listed for the grave violations of killing and maiming and for attacks on schools and hospitals. The Rapid Support Forces armed group has been listed for killing and maiming, recruitment and use, rape and other forms of sexual abuse, and attacks on schools and hospitals. The brutal acts of terror perpetrated on the 7th of October of 2023 on Israeli communities involving the deliberate killing, maiming, torture, and abduction of civilians, including children and other protected persons, as planned and conducted by the armed group Hamas Isn al-Din al-Qassam brigades and affiliated factions, and by the armed group Palestinian Islamic Jihad al-Quds brigades, has led to the listing for the violations of killing and maiming and abduction of children. The magnitude of the reaction by Israeli armed and security operations against Hamas Isn al-Din al-Qassam brigades, the tightening of repressive operations in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and the use of explosive weapons of war with high impact in densely populated areas in the Gaza Strip, leading to death of civilians, including children, and the destruction of civilian objects, has led to the listing of the Israeli armed and security forces for the violations of killing and maiming of children and attacks on schools and hospitals in the Gaza Strip and the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem. All further listings this year relate to non-state armed groups and UN-designated terrorist groups, including the Islamic State in the Greater Sahara operating in Burkina Faso, the Alliance des Forces de Résistance Congolaise in the DRC, the Alliance des Patriotes pour un Congo Libre et Souverain in the DRC, the Mouvement du 23 Mars in the DRC, and the Jama Nusrat ul-Islam wa al-Muslimin, including Ansar Eddin in Mali. It is important to consider the Secretary General's report on this file in the correct normative context. The report is not a legal analysis, and the customary use of terms applied in the report do not constitute legal findings. For this reason, the annexes to the report are not a legal determination, but are developed as a tool of engagement to urge parties to conflict to better protect children and to provide relief and remedy to end and prevent the use and abuse of children for, in, and by armed conflict. The report includes and assesses information in respect of the 6 grave CAC violations against conflict-affected children through the monitoring and reporting mechanism on children and armed conflict. The mechanism was set up by the United Nations to implement Security Council Resolution 1612 and subsequent resolutions. The purpose of the mechanism is to collect and provide for the systematic gathering of information on grave violations committed against children in conflict situations. The information is then used as a basis to foster compliance of parties to conflict with international child protection norms and standards, and leads to well-informed, concerted and effective advocacy and responses to protect and care for children through, most often, jointly agreed action plans between the United Nations and listed parties to end and prevent violation against children. Now I will try to share with you some of the good news of the report. No delisting was decided upon by the Secretary General this year. However, positive developments and progress in the provision of better protection of children in armed conflict was identified and mentioned in the report, both in the specific CAC situations and in Section 5 of the report. Progress was particularly remarked in Iraq, Mozambique, the Philippines, South Sudan, Ukraine, and Yemen, all of which have recorded decreases in the number of grave violations. The UN further made progress in commencing engagement with parties to conflict to protect children in situations in Burkina Faso, Cameroon, the Central African Republic, Colombia, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Iraq, Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory, Mali, Mozambique, Nigeria, the Philippines, Somalia, South Sudan, the Syrian Arab Republic, Ukraine, and Yemen, some of which led to the adoption of measures aimed at providing better protection for children affected by armed conflict. Lastly, more than 10,600 children formerly associated with armed forces or groups received protection or reintegration support during 2023. Invariably, the progress on the protection of children from the ravages of war, as noted above, was greatly assisted by the decision by parties to conflict to engage constructively with the United Nations on the ending and preventing grave violations. The decision, for example, of the opposition Syrian National Army, including Harar al-Sham and Army of Islam, to sign a joint action plan with me to stop the recruitment and use of children in its armed conflict is a welcome act that is expected to release hundreds of children from military ranks. In truth, most, if not all, of the positive actions highlighted by the Secretary General this year in Section 5 as pertaining to parties listed have to do with engagement progress linked to an actual or potential action plan. For this reason, I urge all listed parties to immediately consider the development and signature of action plans with the United Nations to better protect children and end and prevent the use and abuse of children in, for, and by armed conflict situations. In conclusion, the changing nature, complexity, expansion, and intensification of armed conflict, the use of explosive weapons in populated areas, deliberate or indiscriminate attacks against civilians and civilian objects, including infrastructure, and the advent of new armed groups alongside acute humanitarian emergencies and blatant disregard for international humanitarian law and severe violations of international human rights law have led to alarming increases in grave violations. Additionally, new situations of concern have arisen in Haiti and Niger, where the number of grave violations against children is alarming. Lastly, cross-border conflicts and intercommunal violence have persistently impacted children, especially those in the Central Sahel and Lake Chad Basin regions. The monitoring and verification of grave violations remained extremely challenging, including owing to access constraints, high insecurity and threats, and direct attacks on UN personnel, monitors and humanitarian actors, leading to the underreporting of grave violations. The monitoring and reporting mechanism on CAC, while robust, can be improved. But this cannot occur if the resources dedicated to the monitoring and reporting of grave violations against children are continuously cut from the budgets of agencies and bodies due to economic constraints of member states and the reprioritizing of UN funds to serve other purposes other than those of ending and preventing violations against children. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gamba. Thanks very much for the briefing. I'll now turn the floor over for questions. First question, Sharife.
Shall we do 3 at a time?
What?
3 at a time?
If we'll try to gather them up so that she can do them a few at a time. So Sharife, and then after that, Deji.
Ms. Gamba, thank you very much. I'm Sharifa Chitin from Anadolu Agency. If you will allow me, I would like to ask you why you have not been more outspoken about the horrific situation of children in Gaza after the 7th of October. Because from what I see, you have one statement on the 16th of April and you warn against the risk of starvation and imminent famine for children in Gaza and Sudan. But, for example, on the 3rd of April, I followed the Security Council consultations where intentionally depriving life-saving humanitarian assistance to children living in conflict zones was discussed. You did not mention a word of Gaza. So I would like to understand what explains your relative silence, considering that more than 15,000 children have been killed in Gaza since October. Thank you.
Okay, and Deji?
Hi, Ms. Gamba. Shudoji with China Central Television. So, a couple of questions. First, what do you feel that Israel said that given the fact of the report that IDF is the most moral army in the world, what is your response? And you said it's not a legal finding. But don't you worry that if it's not legal finding, it's not legal binding, nobody would care about this report? And what is your projection for this year? Because we know some of those most important and violent conflicts are still going. Thank you.
Do you want to handle those now or one more?
Sure,
okay.
We can do that.
Okay.
I think I have heard a lot about this business of mine not being outspoken or not on the issue of Gaza. Frankly, I think those remarks are a cause of concern to me because clearly I've spoken publicly more than 7 times about it with issuing public statements. That doesn't seem to register anyway. And then there was much ado about a presentation that the Security Council Presidency of Malta called to discuss denial of humanitarian access as a general theme, something that had been in the agenda of the Security Council for some time, with a concept note specifically designed to talk about the denial of humanitarian access as a general theme globally. I was required, as per the concept note, to only relate to the general discussion of DHA, whereas the other speakers following me were required to pick up cases. It is therefore both, I would say, perhaps the best word to say is unkind of one member of the Security Council who had access to the concept note month before to ascribe an intention behind my generic language as required by the President of the Security Council for that generic briefing. So I think that much has been said about nothing, and I'm not saying that I resent it, but it generates a real context of putting doubts about my own objectivity and impartiality in my file, which I really do not accept. I think on the second question about the issue of what the ambassador of Israel tweeted on on Friday last week, this was a leak. It was a leak of a discussion he had with the chef de cabinet when he was given the courtesy of being informed, given a heads up that the Israeli armed and security forces would be listed in the annual report. At no point, as you will see when you read the report, is the mention of the word IDF, so therefore it is incorrect. It's much broader than IDF. It's armed and security forces of Israel. So I think it was a premature leak, not on the basis of a document. The document had not been published, and as far as I know, the document had not been shared. It was only a conversation. As relates to the legal, it has always been a purview of this mandate. It was generated by the General Assembly on a specific decision over 27 years ago, and for the last 25 years, we also obey the mandates, definitions, and requests of the Security Council. And over the 13 Security Council resolutions we have to implement on a year basis, at no point in time has that decision been to gather information for other purposes than raising attention on the perpetrators of patterns and trends on the 6 grave violations, with the ultimate object of changing their behavior, because it is an action-oriented report that leads to my immediate engagement with listed parties to convince them to sign action plans to end and prevent those violations. If they so decide, they're all sovereign states or armed groups with their own ideas, they can decide to engage. If they decide to engage, we are under an obligation to provide technical assistance to that listed party in order for them to speedily stop the violation, release children if they are in their possession, and engage in prevention measures for the future. With this object, this purpose of this annual report, we have managed to delist many state actors as well as non-state armed groups over the years, and I would posit that in many cases there has not been a repetition of the types of violations we have seen in the past. I'm talking of places like Sierra Leone, like Sri Lanka, like Nepal. Even in India, we have already put in place the measures. Thailand. These have been in the report for some years, and then out of the report once the measures mutually agreed have been put in place. Thank you.
Thanks. We'll do one cluster here.
Jagmeet Singh makes comments about after he has read the NESCOP foreign interference report and is deeply disturbed by it.
I am more alarmed today than I was yesterday after having read the report. What is clear to me is that Justin Trudeau knew and didn't act, and Pierre Poilievre doesn't even want to know about serious allegations touching his party. To me, that disqualifies him as a leader, and I do not buy his phony excuses. Both Justin Trudeau and Pierre Poilievre are putting the interests of their party ahead of the country, and that is wrong. Je suis plus inquiété aujourd'hui qu'hier après avoir lu les documents. C'est clair que Justin Trudeau a su l'information, mais il n'a pas agi, et que Pierre Poilievre ne veut pas savoir les détails des allégations qui touchent directement à son parti. Je n'accepte pas ces excuses. C'est clair que les deux, Justin Trudeau et Pierre Poilievre, veulent protéger leur parti au lieu de défendre le pays. Foreign interference is harmful to Canadians. It is especially harmful to people connected to countries like India and China, who are the most frequent practitioners of foreign interference. People should be free to speak their minds, disagree with foreign governments, advocate for policies, run for office, exercise their vote, and be free from intimidation and harassment. At its extreme, foreign interference can result in violence, as we've seen with the alleged involvement of India in the murder of a Canadian on Canadian soil. Today I'm going to speak to you about my impressions and opinions based on the unredacted report from NCCOP on foreign interference. I'm not going to discuss the details from that report, like the names. I'm not going to do that because to do so could jeopardize the ability of our national security systems to do the work that we need them to do to keep us safe, to safeguard our democracy. It is important to say that while I have seen the unredacted report, I did not have access to all the same intelligence that the members of the NCCOP committee had when they came to their conclusions. But after having read the report, I am more convinced than ever of the conclusions of the NCCOP committee and the report, that some parliamentarians are, in the words of the intelligence services, semi-witting or witting participants in the efforts of foreign states to interfere in our politics. That all of these behaviors of these MPs are deeply unethical and contrary to the oaths and affirmations parliamentarians take to conduct themselves in the best interest of Canada. In short, there are a number of MPs who have knowingly provided help to foreign governments, some to the detriment of Canada and Canadians. There are also politicians at all levels of government who have benefited from foreign interference. Some of this behavior absolutely appears to be criminal and should be prosecuted. The redacted report also discusses the Conservative leadership contests, which were the targets of foreign interference by China and India. The Prime Minister has had access to intelligence that raises concerns about MPs knowingly benefiting from foreign interference. He may disagree with that intelligence, but I believe he has not taken the steps he should have to deal with this. He has sent the message that he is willing to accept some level of foreign interference. The leader of the opposition has had information for 10 days that Conservative leadership races were the target of foreign interference by India, a country that is also alleged to have killed a Canadian on Canadian soil, as well as interference from China. His response has been silence. He's not answered a single question from the media. We do not know if anyone from the Conservative Party has followed up on these concerns. And he refuses to get security clearance to get further information that could help him know what happened and what he can do about it. He doesn't want to know, and that is deeply troubling. No one should put their party's interests ahead of the country's interests. Canada comes first. I am not relieved after reading this report. I am more concerned today than I was yesterday. This government has received multiple repeated warnings and recommendations and has not acted. Today, Canada is vulnerable to foreign interference, and this weakens our democracy and the confidence of Canadians. I believe we must find a way to let MPs who are named in this report know that we know what they're up to. I believe this can be done in a way that doesn't compromise national security. If there continues to be no consequences for MPs who knowingly help foreign governments act against Canadian interests, we will continue to be an easy target. Removing MPs who knowingly participate in foreign interference would have the deterring effect on this type of behavior. It would send a message that these countries cannot try to use MPs in this manner. I'm ready for any questions you might have.
Was Elizabeth May wrong? Because she said she was relieved.
Now, I'm responding to the details or my opinion based on the report that I read. The unredacted or the redacted version that Canadians have access to alone should have raised serious concerns and should have maintained those concerns. The redacted version of this report makes it very clear that the Prime Minister knew about this and that there's serious allegations directly impugning the Conservative Party and Conservative Party leadership races, and Pierre Poilievre doesn't want to know. Those should already be seriously concerning. What I read has only bolstered the conclusions that NCCOP report outlines, has only made those conclusions even more concrete.
Mr. Singh, why are you saying the Prime Minister is not willing to take action in the face of what he knows?
Based on what is already publicly available, we saw that he was slow to act and accepted a certain level of foreign interference. That has been confirmed by the report, and it shows unwillingness to take this as seriously as it should be taken. And the fact that Pierre Poilievre doesn't even want to know makes it clear that both of these individuals, Justin Trudeau and Pierre Poilievre, are putting the interests of their party ahead of the country, and that's wrong.
What parties are these MPs associated with? And you're saying MPs, so I'm presuming that they are currently sitting, correct?
I can't respond directly to those two questions, but I can say that there are serious concerns about MPs. That was the conclusion of the NCCOP report. After having read the unredacted version, I am more convinced than ever of the conclusions of the report that is absolutely true.
Was there anything in the unredacted report that was connected to you personally?
I was a target.
Expand on that?
For Nikki Ashton to take her family to Quebec City.
Français?
S'il vous plaît. Ce que vous êtes en train de nous dire, c'est qu'il y a des députés actuellement qui siègent à la Chambre des communes qui ont fait de l'ingérence étrangère, alors que Mme May nous dit le contraire. C'est la conclusion. Vous avez une conclusion complètement différente d'elle, là. Vous vous rendez compte à la suite de la lecture du même rapport?
Les conclusions dans le rapport qui est public indiquent aussi qu'il y a des députés et soulèvent le fait qu'il y a des députés qui ont participé dans l'ingérence étrangère, et après avoir lu les documents, les conclusions de ce rapport étaient confirmées. Donc il y a des conclusions qui étaient confirmées par le document que j'ai lu.
How are you a target? How are you a target?
The report indicated that I was a target.
Is it time to walk? Our democracy is on the line. Is it time to walk away from your affiliation with the Liberal Party, Liberal government?
What the report indicates to me is that this is something that's very serious and should be alarming to all Canadians, and that it requires action. And so what I want to do is, I think that, first of all, every leader of a political party should read the unredacted version. We should talk about how we can take the necessary steps as leaders to ensure that each of our parties are protected from interference in this manner. And we should continue to do the work in committee like we're doing, pushing for the public inquiry to also include the Conservative Party leadership races. We should, as leaders, meet and discuss how we are ensuring that none of our candidates that are running so that we can ensure that our democracy is protected.
En français, M. Singh, donc, vous avez mis au défi tous les chefs de parti d'exclure de leur caucus n'importe quel député qui serait mentionné dans ce rapport-là. Est-ce qu'il y a lieu? Est-ce qu'il y a des députés qui soient exclus d'un caucus? Et du vôtre, avez-vous une confirmation que vous n'avez pas à aller de ce côté-là, jusque-là?
Je peux dire qu'après j'ai lu les documents, que je n'ai pas une raison pour prendre plus des actions pour mon parti. Mais c'est clair qu'on doit prendre des actions pour continuer de travailler contre l'ingérence étrangère en général dans le Parlement. Un suivi?
Allez-vous faire des représentations auprès du chef d'un autre parti ou de plusieurs chefs d'un autre parti pour qu'ils expulsent des députés de leur caucus après avoir lu ce rapport? De quel parti on parle?
Je ne peux pas nommer des détails, mais je peux dire que, comme j'ai dit avant, que tous les chefs de parti, même il y a une seule partie qui reste, mais il y a deux partis qui restent, donc Pierre Poilievre doit lire le document, doit expliquer pourquoi il était si lent sur ces allégations, pourquoi il ne veut pas savoir les détails, pourquoi il ne veut pas savoir plus des détails sur les allégations directement qui notre pays a ingéré, ingérence étrangère, des allégations qui ça touche son parti et les courses à la chefferie. Donc, il doit expliquer pourquoi il ne veut pas savoir tout ça.
The MPs that are involved, wittingly or unwittingly, are they traitors to Canada?
What they're doing is unethical. It is, in some cases, against the law, and it is indeed they are indeed traitors to the country.
Are you comfortable sitting in the House?
Within the report
I'll give you the next one.
that are criminal in nature. Why do you say that?
Well, this was the conclusion of the NSICOP report that's publicly available as well. It was just confirmed upon reading the unredacted version. I can say that conclusion, I'm fully convinced that is absolutely true.
Are you comfortable knowing what you know?
I'll give you this one.
Well, you go next.
Do you have any comment on Nikki Ashton taking her family to Quebec City over Christmas and billing taxpayers $17,000 for that trip?
All MPs have to follow very strict rules in submitting their expenses to the House of Commons. Those I expect all my MPs and all MPs in the House to follow those rules and submit claims. Those claims were submitted and approved.
Why are you comfortable? Sorry, I let you go, so it's my turn. Are you comfortable sitting in the House knowing what you know, and is there a list of MPs in the unredacted report?
Well, the redacted version also suggests there's MPs, so that's publicly available, and that's confirmed by the unredacted version. So certainly it is clear that there are MPs, plural. That was available publicly, and that's confirmed in the unredacted version as well. So it is very serious, and this matter is not in any way addressed, and that's why I said I'm not relieved at all, in fact, I am more disturbed today than I am yesterday. I'm more disturbed by what I've learned, and it really does highlight to me the failure of leadership of both Justin Trudeau and Pierre Poilievre. Deeply concerning failures of leadership. Like, I don't understand, after having read that report, why Justin Trudeau didn't act sooner and continues to show inaction, and why Pierre Poilievre, as I am, a prospective candidate to become Prime Minister of this country, why he expects that people should have trust in him when he doesn't want to know about very disturbing allegations directly connected to his party, that India, among other countries, were involved in foreign interference in leadership races. The fact that he doesn't want to know and has been silent, I believe, very firmly disqualifies him as a prospective leader of this country. Disqualifies him entirely.
En vous entendant que vous avez lu tous les chefs un rapport complètement différent les uns des autres. Là. Vous nous donnez des conclusions qui sont absolument pas les mêmes que Mme May, qui sont pas les mêmes que Dominique Leblanc nous a données. Qu'est-ce qu'on doit retrouver dans ce rapport-là? Est-ce qu'il y a une liste, oui ou non, de députés? On croit comprendre que oui, alors que Mme May nous a dit que non. Comment on explique là, ce langage-là qui est complètement différent, dépendamment à qui on parle?
Les conclusions qui sont publiques indiquent clairement qu'il y a des députés pluraux. C'est clair dans les conclusions. Donc ça, c'est public. Ça, c'est là. C'est écrit noir sur blanc qu'il y a des députés. Et dans le rapport qui est aussi c'est public, que ces députés ont engagé dans les actes qui sont des actes d'ingérence étrangère et que ces actes sont contre la loi dans certains cas. Et tous les actes, ce ne sont pas des actes de quelqu'un avec des bons éthiques. Donc c'est tout ça, c'est dans le rapport public. Donc ce que j'ai vu confirme tout ça. Et ça a du sens parce que c'est dans les conclusions et le rapport a plus de détails, donc ça confirme les conclusions.
Your conclusion is very different from what Ms. May said yesterday. She seemed relieved yesterday. You say it's worse. Were you reading two different reports?
Well, what I'm saying to you is that the conclusion that NSICOP has come with, those conclusions didn't change by anyone's reading of it. The conclusions are still there for the public to read. The conclusions are MPs, plural, were engaged in activities that NSICOP, which is comprised of very, very respectable members of Parliament and other individuals, that conclusion says that the multiple MPs engaged in behavior that is, in some cases, illegal and criminal, and all the behavior is unethical. Those conclusions that the report has publicly given to everybody, I believe, were incredibly confirmed with further details that I read. So the conclusions are there in front of everybody. I'm saying that I've read the document that supports those conclusions, and in fact, I am more convinced than ever of those conclusions.
is at stake here. So why are you continuing to prop up the government who you say isn't taking democracy seriously? Why do you continue to prop them up?
So the question is, what are we going to do about it?
No,
the question
is,
to
why
me.
do you continue to prop up the government when you say our democracy is at stake and this government is not taking our democracy seriously? Why continue to back them up?
We're not at all doing that. What we're saying is we're going to demand answers. We're going to continue to push for solutions. Because we're in Parliament right now, I was able to read these documents. Because we're in Parliament now, we've been able to push for a letter to have the public inquiry also include the Conservative leadership race in a part of the public inquiry's work. We want to use the tools as parliamentarians, as a parliamentarian myself, to use the tools that we have, that I have, to advance democracy. I want to use the tools that I have to get to the bottom of this. The suggestion that an election is a solution to election interference is, I think, a fallacy. What we need to do is use the tools we have to get to the bottom of this. I want to continue to push for more solutions. I want to push for more transparency. I want to push to learn more so we can have better solutions.
Mr. Singh, Ms. May said, I don't think there's a debate about whether there were MPs that were named in the report, but what she said was there was not a secret list of MPs who have been disloyal to Canada. In your assessment of the unredacted report, is there a list of MPs who have been disloyal to Canada?
The conclusions that are public available suggest that there are a number of MPs that were engaged in activities that were unethical, in some cases illegal or criminal. After having read the unredacted version, I agree with that finding. Absolutely. There are clearly a number of MPs that are engaged in that behavior that is borne out by the report. You haven't got one yet. Go for it.
What about senators? Do you see anything about current senators wittingly helping foreign governments as well?
Senators was not included in the public report, and the public report said parliamentarians, and so that is confirmed by the report that is parliamentarians, and it indicates parliamentarians and MPs.
And you previously said that you would kick out NDP MPs that were named. I take it you're not kicking anyone out of caucus today. To be clear,
that's correct.
Okay.
Should anyone else kick people out of their caucuses?
I believe other leaders should read the report and make that determination for themselves. And it's what I've said from the beginning. That's the appropriate thing to do. And I've also said that the Prime Minister has known this information and is clear has not acted and has not acted appropriately. And I maintain that position.
Est-ce qu'il y a des sénateurs? Est-ce qu'il y a des sénateurs impliqués? Parce que le mot parlementaire englobe les députés et les sénateurs. Donc, est-ce que, dans ce que vous avez lu, il y avait des sénateurs qui étaient impliqués?
Le document public dit députés et dit des parlementaires, et ça c'est confirmé par ce que j'ai lu.
And is it current MPs? Are current MPs part of that list?
The way the public inquiry or the public document indicates that this is a concern, I am deeply concerned. I think people should also have those same concerns.
What steps? Can you give us a ballpark? Ms. May did, so can you?
There are a number of MPs.
What steps should the Prime Minister take in response to this?
Take foreign interference much more seriously, have a different response to allegations that are raised for. I think one of the examples came to light publicly was around his actions in relation to Mr. Dong. And it's clear that he accepted a certain level of knowledge of foreign interference and didn't do anything. I think that is completely unacceptable. That's wrong. It should be immediately met with swift action. He delayed in that action, and doing so sends a message that some level of interference is acceptable. That is wrong, and the Prime Minister should not have done that.
How should the Prime Minister act? How should the Prime Minister? What do you want to see from Trudeau now? How should the Prime Minister act? Do you think he should name names on the floor of the House of Commons?
I believe this applies to all leaders, that all leaders should take foreign interference seriously, act immediately. Any allegations that are serious of foreign interference should result in those MPs no longer sitting in caucus at all, and they should not be running again as parliamentarians. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for listening, everyone. Final thoughts. there are some things that actually need to change in our world. And let's start with one. We need our government to be transparent, and we need them to be honest. We need our officials in our world to be honest about what it is that they're doing. They're still treating us as though, we the public, as though we don't know when they're being dishonest, when they're cheating us, when they're selling us out. We do actually know when they're doing all these things. We listened to the other day with Elizabeth May talking about the foreign interference report. Then we heard Jagmeet today talking about the interference report. One says, hey, it's not really no big deal. The other one is extremely disturbed and is calling out and stating that the Conservative Party leader is not a true leader because he doesn't even want to read the report itself. He wants it just to go away. He's saying that the Prime Minister of Canada isn't a true leader because he doesn't want to do anything about what is happening. Something needs to be done, and it isn't up to these people that are sitting on Parliament Hill to do something about it. It is up to us, the public. When the election comes around, if we think we have a dishonest politician running, don't vote for him. That simple. Okay, moving on to other things. It is really disturbing to hear the number of human rights violations that are happening against our children and how they are being recruited into armed conflicts. They're children. They shouldn't be involved in those sort of things. It's bad enough that we have countries where a child is left orphaned because both parents were killed in the armed conflict, and maybe neither one of them were actually a combatant. They were completely innocent. There is a friend of mine out there who was the sole survivor of his house in the Rwandan genocide, simply because his parents and his family did things to hide him as an infant. How he deals with what has happened, he is now teaching people to dance and to celebrate, and to sit down and work out their differences with talk and conversation. It may be something that we all need to learn from globally, is to stop the wars, stop the shooting and the violence, and find a way to have conversations and negotiate until we settle our differences without harm. Thank you for listening to us today here on Depictions Media Radio. I've been your host on Policy and Rights, Michael Clogs. And I do invite you to find that subscribe button wherever it may be and to give us support whenever you can. Please help us spread the love around the world. This show has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions.media for more information.